Hi everyone and welcome back. In today's video, one of my most asked questions is what hardware should I use? So I'm going to take you through it step by step today, from materials to size, anything that you need to know. So let's get going. The first thing we're going to talk about is buckles. Now, when choosing your buckle, you want to consider material, that is metal versus plastic. There are pros and cons to both. The metal does look lovely and gives a high quality finish, and they're also very strong. Your plastic is strong too, and unless you have an insanely strong dog, in which case you'd most likely use a harness anyway, both will be strong enough to be used for collars. I would say the pros of plastic versus metal is your plastic is a lot lighter. When you consider all of your hardware on your collar, the metal can carry a fair amount of weight. Now this won't faze your bigger dogs, but it is something to take into consideration, particularly if your dog is small and quite old. Another pro for plastic is if your dog, like mine, absolutely loves mud and water and all delightful things, I would definitely recommend plastic. Now this is tried and true from my own personal point of view. The reason I say this is your metal buckles rely on a small spring on the inside, and unless you're that amazing person that can replace these tiny springs, and I'm not, this will eventually rust and break if your dog is a lover of water and mud, even if you take good care of it. Whereas your plastic relies solely on flexibility. There's nothing inside that will rot away with water, and I'll show you just now. It just relies purely on the pressure to open and close it. I do still recommend that you take good care of these, make sure that they're clean and dry, and that'll just keep them looking nicer for longer. If your dog prefers to stay dry, then your metal buckles will hold up well. Mine does not, so we're switching to plastic. The next thing to consider with buckles is who you're making them for. Your dogs will always require buckles that have a flat side release, so I'll try and show you here. So this part here is flat, and this just means it will catch against the other half of the buckle, so that when your dog pulls, even the best dogs pull at some point, it's not going to come apart. Whereas if you're making for cats, you will need one of these. This is a breakaway buckle. Now, it pulls apart if your cat catches it on anything, whether they're indoor or outdoor. And the way it pulls apart is that your side releases are actually rounded, so they're not flat, and you will always need this for a cat collar. That's the reason I personally don't love the roller cabezon buckles, the regular belt buckle kind of types, because if your cat gets it caught, you have to tighten it first before you can release it, and it won't come apart, it won't break away. So breakaway buckles are a must for cats. Moving on to D-rings, there are 3 important considerations for D-rings. They will always be metal, so the material isn't a consideration. The first thing to think about is you will need a welded D-ring. So you get welded D-rings and unwelded, and you can see here the welded D-ring has been welded together, that's the whole point, and this makes the joint strong, so it's not going to come apart. Even if your dog doesn't pull, a welded D-ring is what you need. Now you can see here on the unwelded D-ring that there is a gap here. Eventually, with any dog, and particularly if they pull, this will start to bend away and it will come off the collar. So welded D-ring is what you're looking for. The next consideration is your thickness of D-ring. Now, I find all of mine are around 3mm thick, and this is a good thickness even for bigger dogs, but you can go to 2mm for smaller dogs and 4mm for bigger dogs, or even thicker if you prefer. It is partially preference about the look, but I would say 3mm is a good overall thickness. And your final consideration is quite obvious, but make sure that the internal width of your D-ring matches what you're making. And it's similar for the O-rings that I've got here. You don't want to be putting a D-ring that's 20mm on a collar that's 25mm. So just think about whatever width your collar is, your internal dimensions of your D-ring need to match. And it's the same with these O-rings. I use these on my slip leads, and I need to make sure that my material can go through it twice. So I need to consider the thickness of the rope that I use and the internal diameter of my O-ring, and it's just simply that. And it also, like I said, it's partially preference and look. An O-ring this size is tiny. It would look daft on a bigger dog lead, And similarly, you know, a larger O-ring like the black one is going to look really silly on a tiny dog lead. So if you're making a lead for a Chihuahua, I wouldn't recommend getting a 30mm O-ring because it's going to look stupid, essentially. Not to be blunt, but that's basically when I say preference, that's what I mean. Consider the overall look of what you're making and then just choose wisely. Moving on to the final part of the collar hardware, your triglide. Triglides are only used for adjustable collars. If you've ever followed one of my paracord collar videos, they are fixed length. You don't need a triglide for these. The first consideration, again, is your material. So your triglide doesn't require a high breaking strength, as your dog pulling won't really affect it. So your main consideration is aesthetic. If you've chosen a metal buckle, then your metal triglide might look better. If you've chosen a plastic buckle, then your plastic might look better. Now you can see these two look a little bit different. They're the same size and they do exactly the same job. It's mostly the look that you're considering. This one here is a bit easier to adjust as there's more to hold on to, but it can look a little bit bulky. Whereas this one looks a bit neater, it tends to hide itself in the collar, so it might be a good choice if you want something that doesn't steal the focus. Finally, moving on from collars, I'm going to talk about the hardware for leads. Like I said, if I'm making slip leads, I'll use an O-ring. I tend to just use this size because I make bigger dog leads, but like I said before, if you're making a smaller dog lead, you'll want to use a smaller O-ring. I have run over this, but I'll just do it quickly again. So things to consider for O-rings are the thickness. Again, I found about 3mm to be an overall good thickness. Internal diameter, you'll want to make sure that your rope can pass through it twice, and make sure it's welded. Size-wise, again, just consider the overall look, as you don't want a giant O-ring on a lead for an extra small dog, and vice versa. Now onto your standard leads. These are both clip lead attachments. Now they do look different. This is your common snap hook, whereas this one is called an oyster hook. Now, they both work the same. I prefer the look of the oyster clip leads, but it's just a personal preference. Material wise, you can get plastic clip lead attachments, but I always use metal. You get smaller attachments for smaller dogs and they weigh less, so the metal weight doesn't really come into play a lot. I just feel that the metal provides a bit more security as it's very unlikely to break. Now, next, I would consider what type of lead you're making. So I make a lot of rope leads, so the oyster clip is better for me. It has the rounded base that you can see here, which looks nice as the rope just slides right through and it stays attached. If you're making a lead out of webbing or sewing a fabric lead, you will want one with a square base, and you want the internal dimensions of this to match the width of your lead. Now finally, let's talk about size. So this is my most common question that I get, and honestly there is no one right answer. The thing to consider here is the size of the dog and your own personal preference. So I'm going to put everything in the description below, but essentially big dogs, Labradors, Great Danes, etc. I would use a 25mm buckle, 1-inch buckle, which is here. This would look daft on a small dog. I wouldn't be putting this on a Chihuahua. Whereas your smaller ones, your 10mm wide buckles, which is here, I would use this on your tiny dogs, your Chihuahuas, your teacup breeds, any sort of breed like that. Overall, what I use, I would say your extra small dogs, I would use the 10mm buckle. Your extra small to your small dogs, your Westies, your Cavalier Spaniels, etc. I would use a 15mm buckle, which is this one here. You can get 16-17mm buckles as well. I would just say pick a size and stick with it. For dogs that are just maybe you think this is a bit too small, I would use 20mm. So that's an overall good size for your small breeds, and even medium breeds such as Staffies, Cocker Spaniels, your larger Spitz breeds. For larger breeds, I use this one. I use 25mm. You can get wider. You can get 30mm or even wider, which would be good for your greyhounds and similar, but I know most owners walk them on harness now, so that's not something that I offer. So that is it for today, and I hope today's video has helped. Just keep in mind the breed or size you're making for and what you like as the creator, and you'll be absolutely fine. As always, if you've liked today's video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Bye!